Hello and welcome back, everyone. Today we are going to be going through the book that I wrote, Attention to Agency, Chapter 7. So we're going to be picking up in a little bit of a spot that is maybe disjointed because it has been months since we did a read-through of this book whatsoever. Last chapter we went over was reframing. The central core kind of, I guess, thesis of the book, or what the book is aiming at doing, is producing agency, and it makes this argument that the central root of agency is attention, and for each of these there are 5 problems that are presented in the odd number chapter, the odd number chapters, and then even number chapters provide a solution. The previous chapter we had read was reframing and ecosystem, which was providing a solution to I forget what it was providing the solution to, but this was the last chapter we read through some months ago. Just to kind of briefly go through the chapter summary here, which maybe will give us a little bit of footing, although maybe not quite. We are going to say that meaning is, as a sense of purpose, is not an option. It's a necessary component of being human. Meaning as a mode of style of understanding is an option, and one we need to take seriously. We must decide how we represent things to ourselves. The book in general is moving from a place of making an argument that is more philosophical in nature about free will and arguing the site at which we have free will is at attention, to becoming more self-helpy at the end of the book. I guess since this is mirrored, I should do this at the end of the book, where it is giving more practical kind of things that you can do to implement. And so we're starting to enter that here with Chapter 6. To reframe is to ascribe new meaning to ourselves or our situation. We should strive to be both accurate, but also direct our focus to interpretations that are empowering and avoid viewing problems as pervasive and permanent. This, of course, is invoking... I forget the name of the gentleman, the guy who invented positive psychology, but this is... oh, man. The name is going to struggle with me. Language primes us. The language we use primes us. We should choose our words with intent. And here we get to kind of a little bit of a thing that we might notice, and also just kind of going through, is whenever we have kind of segmented something where we're planning on fleshing this out more later, we generally do it in a parenthetical. We also have parenthetical asides, but this is kind of a note to expand on later. It is about at this time in writing the book, where we are on Chapter 6, that I discovered that generally speaking for nonfiction, you are supposed to give a sort of proposal for your book, and that you aren't supposed to actually full-on write a nonfiction book before you kind of get a book deal. Or this is the conventional way of doing things. And so, as we will see when we start reading through Chapter 7, a lot of this is in parenthetical and is just kind of notes, and this kind of is the beginning of the breaking down of a lot of portions of the book, so I will need to fill in some gaps as we read through it here, but I think I will be able to explain the main ideas. Taking responsibility for changing ourselves and our self-esteem, for the options we view as available. This is, of course, a big one, is one of the central ideas of the book is you have to do almost everything ahead of time. If you, the options that come into your awareness, you can only take options that you see as available, and in real time, the options, you do not have control over what options appear in your awareness, and that this is something you can work on ahead of time so that in real time, different options become available to you. It's been a while. Hey, 412 Assad. Been waiting for this. We haven't, it's been a while since we've gone down the book, the book vein. I wonder if I missed that previous chapter. We have the VODs on the YouTube. The VODs are on the YouTube for every single chapter. And so if you wanted to check the ideas YouTube, the VODs are available. Ecosystem is a two-way relationship. And then discussed in standards. In the same way Marcus Aurelius cut himself off from avoiding things outside our control, we must cut ourselves off from unhelpful options. And I think that I mentioned one of my very favorite studies, which is a study that looked at smokers who were also stewardesses, or it might have been stewardesses and pilots. But what they discovered is that the urge to smoke did not correlate with how long it had been since they smoked a cigarette, but rather how close they were to landing. That is, how quickly the opportunity to smoke was approaching them. And they found that this is an interesting kind of thing, because it's not how long you've been without a cigarette that makes you feel like you need to smoke. It's the availability of the option to smoke that gives you the feeling of needing to smoke. And this is an interesting kind of distinction, because if you view something as an option, you can experience a craving for it. If it's categorically not an option, then it's not going to give you this sort of craving. And so to this extent, or to the extent that this is true, our ability to cut ourselves off from unhelpful options so that they don't seem available in the same way the stewardesses and pilots don't feel that they can smoke while they're on the plane, this will help us to, it's not just making it so that we are giving ourselves the options we want, but also cutting us off from the options we don't want. I think you misspelled Aurelius. Did we really? Oh yeah, that's a lot of extra syllables. There we go. I am very much not a good speller. Spell check is the problem of helplessness was the problem that was set forth in chapter 5, and this is chapter 6. Is kind of the response for this to this is doing things proactively. Okay. So now we have chapter 7, the problem of performance. Now, every single block of 2 chapters is dealing with a portion of this sentence. Agency is effective action in the direction of our values. And this one is addressing efficacy. We have, of course, quotes that we need to put in, as you can see. But at the start of this, we write, I encourage you to do a video search of Charles Barkley yips. We will be taking a look at this. Before proceeding, you should be able to find a video of his golf swing where he pulls back, swings, stops mid-swing, hitches, and then finishes his swing. As far as I can tell, this is the most dramatic example of yips. Now, Charles Barkley has since fixed his golf swing, but here's his swing. For those of you who have never seen this. And it is perhaps one of the best examples of performance going just horribly and awfully wrong. He has worked on this, so he doesn't do that as much anymore. His golf swing is still not great, but one of the ideas, as we explain more, is that performance can go horribly wrong even if you are kind of trying to structure yourselves and set yourselves up for success. And so this is going to be kind of what this chapter addresses, is even if we can direct our attention to something, give ourselves available options and set ourselves up in such a way that our mindset is approaching what it is that we care about, sometimes performance is just bad. And so he has since improved his swing. He has. True. And golf is maybe not often thought of as a high-pressure sport, but it's actually one of the sports that's the most psychologically intense, because you have so much build-up to an individual, 2-second thing, which is swinging the club, that it actually becomes enormously high pressure. I sometimes think that Olympic weightlifting is also kind of similar in this fashion, in that you only have to perform for 3 seconds. And so very often, if your head is not right in those 3 seconds, your performance will often suffer. And this is one of the things with lifting, is very often if you're not mentally in it, you know you will fail. And it's a little bit of a catch-22, because this knowledge that you will fail is one of the drivers as to why you fail. But one of the things that golfers do to kind of override the yips is they actually switch from right to left-handed. So professional golfers sometimes develop the yips later in life, or like it's during their career, and it is absolutely crippling. And these are professional athletes that succumb to pressure, and they just lose the ability to swing, and they start swinging like this. And the solution for many professional athletes, golfers, when this happens to them, is to just switch hands and start doing it left-handed. Or if they're left-handed, doing it right-handed, which is kind of insane that you would, switch which hand you are swinging with mid kind of thing. But the idea is we're setting the frame of how performance can go horribly wrong, although obviously we definitely need to expand out here in the yips. Excitement and performance. The last chapter was largely on creating an underlying mental state and ecosystem to best position ourselves to show up. But showing up is not the same as being effective. In a lot of areas, showing up alone, when done consistently, is good enough for success. That is, in a lot of things, you don't actually have to perform at a high level, you just have to be there. I also knew someone who used "I can't do this" as a kind of battle cry, which worked because it removed the pressure to succeed. That's actually interesting. There's some research to demonstrate that that's effective. I don't know if we're going to see that cited here, but they're writing out what you are afraid of and how things might go wrong before you engage in a high performance or high pressure sort of situation. Actually tends to diffuse it a lot, which is pretty interesting. I actually have tremendous performance anxiety when I am competing and stuff, but ironically, I have like zero, or not zero, but I have almost no performance anxiety when I am doing public speaking, which is to me a very, very strange thing. So one of the reasons why over the board in chess I didn't do very well, and also one of the reasons why playing live poker is a bit of a struggle for me, is a very, very intense performance anxiety. And what I would do in chess is I would tense up my entire body so much that I would actually like forget to breathe. And sitting like that kind of like for an hour, barely breathing, very, very tense, what it would do is eventually... And this was kind of before I wrote this book or did a lot of the research for this book. But what this would do is, like, eventually I would just be so exhausted, I would just super flub, like, really, really hard, kind of from maintaining that state. And I would just play some, like, idiotic move, and I would punt really hard when I would play in person. And I would often get a very, very strong position in the opening and then just kind of punt. Just like an hour into sitting down, basically. But let's continue. In a lot of areas, it's not. It is. This is. One has to both show up and perform. As far as approaching the task from the perspective of attention goes, this requires three things. Having a good mindset going in, which you can control ahead of time, and focusing on the right things when it comes time to perform. That's two things. The second is having the right model. Oh, okay, that's the first thing. Having a good mindset going in and focusing on the right things when it comes time to perform, which you can condition yourself ahead of time. The second thing is having the right model for looking at what success looks like, as well as what the process of skill acquisition should look like. The third is paying the right amount of attention. According to performance expert Ch7 choking, who I think wrote the book called Choke, choking can occur when people think too much about activities that are usually automatic. This is usually called paralysis by analysis. By contrast, people also choke when they're not devoting enough attention to what they are doing and rely on incorrect routines. There is an interesting kind of graph where, and you might see this in psychology, your performance will go up and up and up, and it looks a little like a bell curve. I think it's often not exactly a bell curve. It's represented as a bell curve, but it doesn't actually look like a bell curve. in terms of the actual data set. It's just often represented like that. Performance actually just kind of falls off a cliff. But performance tends to get better as your level of interest and arousal goes up. And it gets better and better and better to a certain point where it peaks, and then it starts decreasing because of performance anxiety in a general sense. And I don't know if we have a picture of this, but this is where we're going to talk about when talking about arousal. This is the thing we were perhaps thinking of including, is the fact that as you get progressively, there's diminishing returns on being intensely focused on something. And yips is one of the first ways that emotions gets in the way. And now we are going to talk about a chess, poker, and tilt, which is... I have a bit of background in both chess and poker, so let's get into it. Life is complicated to analyze as a whole. Success is subjective, contingent upon values. Depending on what you value, different things are going to look successful, and often difficult to evaluate. Further, taking a step back, it is also difficult to evaluate our evaluation. From what we looked at last block, evaluating success is also contingent upon what frame we occupy. What we determine is important and a source of meaning will also determine what we look at as an indicator of success. When we extend the frame, our circle of concern, to the external, we introduce the environment more. When something's in a parenthetical, we're thinking of, again, reworking or this type of thing, although that sentence seems kind of fine enough. The external environment can be responsive to our efforts, but obviously isn't always so. Luck is a big factor in terms of real-world results. To quote Ziglar, success is when opportunity meets preparation. We can't control our opportunities, but we can control our preparation. Further, how we should judge ourselves is not based on the results or opportunities, but based on our own preparation. What this means is that we ought to have a worldview and method for analyzing results that is sensitive to the fact that results can often be outside of our control, which means that we ought to focus on something related to, but not exactly results themselves. As our examples, we're going to look at and contrast two games. I don't think instead needs to be there. Chess, poker, and chess. Chess is a game of pure skill in which both players have perfect information. There are no dice or random cards determined at one's disposal. There's a slight caveat in whoever rolls to be white or black, or the pairings you roll in a tournament are effectively random, but this is where the randomness ends. The board is set up the same way every time. You are always, unless you're playing Chess 960, you're always perfectly aware of what's going on the board, unlike a game like Battleship, which also has no random element. Both players choose where the ships go and where to fire, but it is a game with imperfect information, only knowing misses, hits, and ships sunk. When we discussed the unknown, we talked about game theory as a tool for making sense of things where one had imperfect information. Generally speaking, you are going through life with very limited information that is not only limited, but is also likely to be incorrect or not a perfect representation of things. Game theory isn't useful in the same way for chess. It's not. In chess, if you want to know what your opponent will do, you look at the board and you try and figure out what their move will be and assume that they make the best move. This is called not playing hope chess. Hope chess is when you hope they play a bad move. If they don't, so much better. If we can beat their best move, then we can beat all their moves. Because chess is a game of pure skill, being significantly better player will mean that you will win a majority of the time. This also means you can easily infer who is the better player by the results of the game. The feedback you receive in terms of results in chess is a very accurate depiction of actual skill. Chess is what guy's name, we gotta look up the guy, would call a kind learning environment. This is the guy who made the distinction between kind and wicked learning environments. Best viewers on blankety blank. Sure, bro. Can we ban this guy? Kinky slaying, though. What a name. We will ban them, though. /ban. Almost did /bad, which is, a special kind of admonishment. instead of /ban/bad chatter. That, of course, was a bot. Poker is also a game of skill, but it is not a game of pure skill. There's an element of chance in the cards you're dealt. It's actually a huge element, and imperfect information, as you don't know what cards are yet to come, or your opponent's cards. You have a very good model of the possibilities. You know that there are 52 cards in the deck, 13 of each suit and 4 of each number, and each type of face card. But you only know possibilities, not actualities. Game theory is a lot more useful for poker because what your opponent can have is unknown, but can be mathematically analyzed in great detail because you know the possibilities. In the most popular poker variant, Texas Hold'em, the edge, advantage you have against your opponent or the field, that you can have is quite small, even if you're much better. If you were to be given the same amount of chips and a single opponent and told to play against until one person had all the chips, being able to win 55% of the time when playing one-on-one is considered very good. This means that it is incredibly difficult to determine who is the better player simply by the results of a contest. It's almost the same as flipping a coin. Your small sample size cognitive bias, we're going to make a point kind of here, but there is what's called the availability heuristic, which is that if you have an available data point that is relevant to any particular kind of evaluation of something, you will generally overvalue the data point that you have. And so generally speaking, when you have a very small sample size, you are much more than you should if you understood statistics or thought statistically. You're much more likely to overemphasize the results in that type of feedback. A lot of people will make inferences based on like a feedback of n equals 1 or only one experience. So that'd be like, for example, if you're in a bar, although this isn't what people do these days, and you approach a woman and she like shoots you down, this type of thing, and you're just like, you form the inference that I'm unattractive. You've literally approached one person and extrapolated towards that type of thing just on the basis of that one instance. Or even if you approached 10 women, it would still be true that the sample size is relatively small. 10 is a small number. Not to mention the fact that when you get like shot down, your subsequent approach is probably significantly worse because, you know, you don't feel as good about yourself. We have a very, very strong bias to overvalue information that is in small sample sizes. Okay, the feedback you receive in terms of results in poker is a terrible depiction of your skill. Poker is what Guy's name would be considered more of a wicked learning environment. One of the ideas is in poker, it's very hard to get a large enough sample size to really be able to know whether or not you are the 55% player or the 45% player. Because in order to like hit that, you would have to have a really, really large sample. Not to mention that this is playing to exhaustion, 55 to 45, one person has the chip, so the other person gets all of them. Very often this isn't exactly how poker works. You're playing against multiple people. Some of those people might be better, some might be worse. It requires tens of thousands of hands to actually know if you're in the favorite in a field. This is an important point to be made about pessimism. There's an important point to be made about pessimism and realism. Despite how chess hustlers might be portrayed in music and television, it's incredibly difficult to play chess for money. It is. Contrasted with that, it is actually very easy to play poker for money. In fact, you only play poker for money. The reason being is that in chess, people can very quickly determine if you're better than them, and they can be confident in that determination, and then will just quit you and refuse to play you for money. In fact, most chess hustlers, the way that it works is you actually just pay them for the game, regardless of who wins. In poker, it is very easy to form the misevaluation that you are the better player. And what you will often do is you will attribute your losses to bad luck and your wins to being so skilled and handsome. We see that here. It's people's optimism that allows them to be fleeced. Hello, Mr. Gaming. When is the book coming out? I don't know. I tried to pick up an agent for this deal. I'm not sure if the book is... I mean, I could self-pub, I could go back, I could work on it. There's a lot of things that I would rework on the book, because I wrote this a couple years ago. And, I mean, if there was sufficient demand, I would maybe do it. One of the problems is I think that the number of people who are interested in this is probably in the double digits. And I would have to spend, you know, in order to get it in a state where I feel comfortable with it being published, the number of hours I would have to spend is a few hundred, I think. Because there's several of, or maybe 1 to 2. Maybe a few is like a little bit too much. And maybe I have a good enough structure here that I would be okay publishing it. But one thing is I wanted to do it through an agent because I'm not 100% sure. I wanted to go through an editorial process because I'm not 100% sure if all my citations and stuff are above board, and so that left me a little bit uncomfortable, but I suppose I could just YOLO it out and self-pub. But, back to being effective. In chess, the range of a player's skill isn't particularly polarized. That is to say, the much stronger player won't go from playing well and winning to suddenly losing. In poker, player skill can majorly swing. A player can go from being a solid winner, winning more money than they lose overall, to spewing off their chips. We talked about in Chapter 3 how the unknown might negatively affect one's ability to operate. That you don't know if you're playing well, or what the right decision actually is when you've thought through the logic, makes poker difficult to play psychologically. If the players try and figure out what their opponent is doing, rather than playing a particular strategy for their hands, they run the risk of leveling themselves. Leveling is where you keep adding layers of analysis and it turns into a bit of an infinite regress, paired with some degrees of anguish. If they bet this, then this means that they are strong, but if they know that it means that they are strong, then it actually means that they are weakness, but if... yeah, etc., etc. One of the early poker theorists, Mark Caro, gave the mantra "weak means strong and strong means weak" as his mantra for evaluating tells. This might work at lower level play, but mathematically analysis, describing ranges, and being unexploitable by giving yourself quotas as on what percentage of hands you have to continue on based on bet size in one strategy dominates higher level play, where one only deviates from a sound strategy if they feel they can exploit their opponent. Furthermore, there's also a problem of feeling, as well as perhaps being, owned, or otherwise being owned by your by opponents. And so the example I wanted to give is sometimes people make a really, really large bet, there's certain situations in poker, perhaps this takes too long to explain, where your range is what's called capped. So, for example, generally speaking, when you have good hands, you put in more money. If you have a not so good hand, you will generally not put in more money. And so what will often happen is there are certain play patterns where the amount of good hands you could have is functionally very, very low. So, for example, if the board comes, let's call it Ace-7-2, it goes, or not Ace-7-2, Queen-7-2. Let's say the board comes on Texas Hold'em, the action between you and another player goes check-check. You both choose not to bet. And then the next card is a 3. You both go check-check. And then the next card is a 10. Now, neither of you have bet, so at this point it's really unlikely that you have a queen. Even if you had a 10, betting on the turn would make some degree of sense. This is kind of the only hand that could really have just banked it really hard. But it's going to be very hard for you to have a really strong hand if you've gone check-check multiple times. So if in this situation you check for the third time, and then your opponent just bets, but this absolutely massive bet, it's so hard for you to have a really good hand there. And so you are put in this disgusting situation because you haven't bet any of the 3 times, and if you had something good you would have bet, where they can make that move, and it's a move, and it probably succeeds most of the time. And technically what you do is you have to evaluate all the hands you could have there and just call with your very best, or call with hands that specifically block really good hands from your opponent that your opponent could conceivably play that way. But the idea is you can let your feelings get the best of you and just go, oh, my opponent's just betting massively because they know I can't have anything here. And they think that, and you just don't want to get owned. And so you call with like ace high or something, and then your opponent just turns over 3 tens, and you're like, oh, I see. Which is kind of like the hand that they could have there that would make some sense. But yeah. It would cut into your Victoria 3 time and delay the next 1,000 hour review. The leveling analysis dominates rock, paper, scissors. I don't know too much about competitive rock, paper, scissors, but I freaking love playing rock, paper, scissors, because what I do is before I play rock, paper, scissors with my opponent, 2 out of 3, I tell my opponent, I'm going to throw rock every single time. And they usually laugh and go, okay, let's do this. And then I will proceed to throw rock every time, and I have about a 60 or 70% win rate with that strategy. But I really like that strategy because it's funny as hell, because they really expect you to change it up. And you just don't. You just throw rock every time after telling them. And it's the funniest thing to win. Even if that won 40% of the time, I still think I would like that strategy, but it wins more often than it doesn't. Which is hilarious. We know from our discussion on freedom that if another person is committing what is perceived to be an injustice, we tend to react more strongly to that. So if you think someone's getting out of line and just betting with nothing because they know you can't call, we let emotion seep into our play. This is what's called going on tilt. If our opponents are allowed to get lucky, but then we try and play back at them with marginal hands, deviating from our strategy, then we are on some level consciously choosing to play poorly. We want to expand that metaphor for life. Sometimes you just play poorly. I don't know which cognitive bias study I wanted to invoke here. Just reading through this, it's been a hot minute. And then we want to do some analysis on poker here, where we can use computers to analyze poker. There's actually these incredibly incredible solvers that have developed a lot since I actually wrote this, although they were around when I wrote this, which give absolutely insane strategies for how to play poker. And high-level players often consult computer analysis and this type of thing. Tilt is the second way that emotions get in the way, though, or experiencing frustration. Next up, we have a wicked world. What does our feedback in the world generally look like, and how does it correspond to our performances? There's 2 kinds of learning environments. There's wicked and kind learning environments. So a kind learning environment is where your feedback... Here, let's maybe look up, since we're trying to explain it. I think we can find... Is there really not a Wikipedia article for this? I think we could just briefly kind of explain it. But a wicked environment is where the feedback you receive is not reliable or not immediate and is divorced from pretty significant from your immediate practice and response. And so and a kind learning environment is where your feedback is immediate, it is straightforward, it's easy to understand. An example of a kind learning environment is chess. Generally speaking, if you have, and one of the distinctions that the book Range draws is a bit of an interesting one in regards to kind of wicked learning environments. if you play more chess, generally you get more feedback and you get better. Chess is a game where skill increases relatively linearly with the amount of hours you play. In wicked learning environments, it's often difficult to learn what is correct, and poker is an example of a wicked learning environment because your feedback, not only do you not know if you had the best hand a lot of the times when you lose and you decide to fold, you also have feedback that is incredibly random. There's an extremely high degree of randomness involved, and you're going to misattribute some things to skill and some things to luck. And it is incredibly hard to get better at poker relative to chess, where the feedback is immediate and also incredibly straightforward. We do end up wanting to talk about this book, and I guess we're going to talk about it a little bit, so I think I'll stop explaining. But in kind learning environments, specialization and hours is incredibly important, and we have kind of this idea of the 10,000 hour rule, where skill is largely determined by the number of hours. Chess, for example. Contrast this in wicked learning environments, like actually music is a relatively wicked learning environment. The number of hours you have is much less important, and being able to have different sorts of sources, the argument that the book Range makes is having different sources of inspiration and reference experiences to draw on actually might be more important than acquiring a ton of hours. So having a bunch of different pockets of stuff might be more important in instances such as jazz. I think that maybe the type of music might matter. But we want range in wicked learning environments, and we engage in analogical thinking where we compare one thing to another. Multiple perspectives and metaphors are going to be good when the types of feedback we receive isn't necessarily going to be good, because it helps with analysis. This, of course, definitely needs to be expanded quite a bit, and is going to kind of be a little bit, as we roll through these later chapters, it's going to be a little bit rough because it's going to be a lot of me filling in the blanks from something I wrote quite some time ago. But let's continue. Research indicates that not only are we generally terrible at long-term prediction, we really are, even in fields we purport to have specialists in, but we also grossly overestimate the accuracy of our predictions as well. This is especially true with pundits, and Daniel Kahneman is pretty good about pointing it out, but the post-hoc analysis by pundits is generally very, very strong. And so what they're acquiring skill in is actually generally not prediction, like news anchors and such, and commentators on various things, especially politics. What they're what they're actually good at is post hoc analysis, making it seem like they knew what was going to happen all along, and that something was self-evident, and that this is a very you always look at what happened through the perspective of post hoc analysis, but you make decisions in terms of predictive analysis. And some people just get really, really skilled at the post hoc analysis rather than being actually predictively effective. And if you want to actually be effective as an individual, your analysis, if you are engaging in something that's relatively high cognitive level, you have to be good at predictive analysis, not just a post hoc analysis. But if you want to just appear knowledgeable to other people, post hoc analysis is fine. Yeah, just like suddenly everyone knew that Trump was going to win, basically. It's very... if you read the studies on like how, basically speaking, pundits can't really predict better than the average person what's going to happen, suddenly paying attention to what they think becomes a lot less... like, it seems like really silly, especially because they're in special kinds of echo chambers. Now, to be fair, they do have access to, generally speaking, more information than the average person, but it doesn't actually make them better at conducting any sort of predictive analysis, studies seem to indicate, or if it's better, it's by such a low margin that it's almost irrelevant. There are people who specialize specifically in predicting things and enter in competitions where they're going to predict things. You can look them up. I think that they get mentioned in Think Again, but as super forecasters. Let's see if we can find a Wikipedia article. But these are the people who, if you're going to like make a bet based on analysis, a super forecaster is a person who makes forecasts shown by statistical means that have been consistent and accurate relative to the general public or experts. Super forecasters sometimes use modern analytical and statistical methods to document estimates, the base rates of events. Research finds that such forecasters are typically more accurate than experts in the field who do not understand, who do not use analytical and statistical techniques. This has been overstated by some sources. It's a trademark, etc. Okay. There is actually an interesting study that I'm not sure if this, I think it was in, this is an interesting point that Kahneman brings up, and I'm currently listening to his book on audiobook. It's an interesting example. Let's say that there's this guy named Mark. And Mark is a quiet, well-mannered man that is, very studious. He is knowledgeable, he's well-read, but he's this mild-mannered temperament. Do you think Mark is going to be more likely to be a librarian than the average person, or less likely than the average person to be a librarian? And you can pause and consider this, or I'll give you guys a second, those of you who are watching live. And the thing is if you said more likely than the average person, you've fallen victim to kind of, I forget the name of the fallacy or the bias, but the description sounds like a librarian, and you've thought about it, and you're like, okay, so he's probably a librarian. I think it's the availability heuristic. So you've used the information you've had, and you've formed the inference that, okay, Mark's probably a librarian. Or more likely, that is going to be more likely than the average person. And what you've overlooked is base rates. So something like, if you've ever been in a library, you might notice the librarians tend to be women. I think it's 87% or something like this of librarians are women. By virtue of being a man, even though he has the traits that kind of fit the description of a librarian, Mark is still going to be less likely than the average person to be a librarian, because the population of average person includes women who are overwhelmingly the kind of share of librarians. And so the problem or the bias is you're overvaluing the information that you have that's immediately presented to you, and undervaluing the information that would take a little bit more critical thinking or knowledge or this type of thing. And so you're performing a sort of bad sort of prediction. Obviously, if the information in the description included the fact that 87% of librarians are women, you would have been able to come to the conclusion that, okay, so he's going to be less likely than average. But it's this type of cognitive bias, or one of these types of cognitive biases, which makes it hard to evaluate information, like in the case of poker, where we like lose a hand, and we are going to overvalue that piece of information, how that hand went, because that's what we have available. But in order for basically the coin flipping nature of poker's edge to be realized, we need a sample size that is absolutely enormous, and we need to not overvalue the very limited information we have. That's so sneaky, lol. Yeah, I mean, it's very... Anytime, like, you have to predict anything, like, it's really important to know base rates. And even if you're a statistician, you're going to overlook this type of stuff when you're trying to think quickly and you're shortcutting the means of, like, the way that you were thinking. But okay, let's continue. The problem is that we need to extend our grasp to things that are external to ourselves. if the feedback we receive is insufficient for us to make predictions regarding our environment, and often it is because of the ways that we think are actually not effective, if we're bad at making long-term predictions, then we should focus on processes which we could develop in the short term. So we want to kind of change our focus to being looking for markers of feedback that we can use, that we know will help us specifically in skill acquisition, and focusing more on skill acquisition than necessarily focusing on actual outcomes. We obviously don't have a paragraph constructed here, but when you focus on skill acquisition, outcomes, the problem with outcomes is that very often, the outcomes aren't actually very good feedback. And it's easier to find good feedback in regards to skill acquisition. And so this is the thing we should focus on. Bad learning is the third way that emotions get in the way. Which is very often... I don't know exactly what we wanted to say here, actually. Or is this kind of concluding what we're saying here? Yeah, I think it's the wicked learning. So we said that there's 3. We've had 1 section for each thing. This is the fact that learning, it's very often you can learn the wrong way of doing things, is one of the ways in which emotion gets in the way. To some extent, if you're one of my viewers, you're probably interested in Victoria 3. Victoria 3, I think, is a wicked learning environment, because in Victoria 3, the feedback you receive is the line is always going up. And so when you first start playing Victoria 3, it's really easy to form the inference that certain things are good when they're not good, because the only feedback you have is your GDP is improving. And the problem is your GDP could have improved by more if you did something a different way. And very often there's also the effect of not just this availability heuristic getting in the way of, learning the game, or performing better in the game, in that, your limited feedback where everything looks like it's doing well is not actually good feedback. But secondarily, there's also confirmation bias in Victoria 3, which is very often, I think, people implement the laws they think should be good, and then once those laws are in place, they watch the line go up, and then they get feedback, and then they form the conclusion that the law is actually good. You saw this a lot more when Victoria 3 first came out, but a lot of people were super bullish on stuff like command economy and like hyper-discriminatory societies when they were just really, really, really bad. But it's very easy to learn badly, as a result of just kind of how our brains work and cognitive biases. Vic 3 patch notes looking good, but putting them on Google Docs was a weird choice for Paradox, not gonna lie. Yeah, basically. What's funny is they actually patched this morning, so like, you had me there for a second. 1.8.6 dropped this morning. Here we have choking, which obviously we choked when it came to writing this, but okay. We have a limited amount of working memory. You can think of, I think it's 7 plus or minus 2 things is what most people's working memory is. Generally speaking, people are keeping track of, 7 items simultaneously. You can use memory devices, chunking information to make it more meaningful, chessboard, meaning study, and cognitive load. Okay, well, if you think about 2 things you're going to perform, or too many things you're going to perform badly, it's a limited kind of thing that you can do. But the chessboard study is a little bit of an interesting one in that if you take an expert chess player and you ask them to look at a chessboard, they can memorize all the pieces on the chessboard looking at it for like 2 seconds. And if you take a beginner, they can't do that. But if you give them a chessboard and you put the pieces on randomly, rather than putting the pieces on as a result of playing in a game, the expert chess player actually doesn't do any better than kind of the amateur. And because, keeping track of 64 things is hard, which is what you do when you look at a chessboard and you try and memorize it. And the idea is that what the expert chess player does is when the pieces are on the board in a specific position and it's arrived at from like a normal game of chess, they actually can chunk the information much better. And so let's find a picture of a king, or let's just find actually just like any chess picture so we can explain this a little bit better. But hopefully you guys can see that. It's not cut off on the sides. No, it's not. Okay, cool. So here we have, hopefully my mouse is visible. Is it? Okay, cool. So here we have a chess position that was arrived at from a normal game. A chess master can look at this for 2 seconds and then everything will be memorized. And the difference is with an amateur player, when they are looking at this chessboard, they are looking at 64 pieces of information. They are looking at every single square as a square and that has a piece on it or doesn't have a piece on it, and they cannot possibly look at all this and memorize 64 pieces of information because, again, working memory is 7 plus or minus 2 items. You can really only think of a few things. But what a really strong chess player sees is they see, for them, the information is chunked. So all of the pawns, this is not, what is this? 1, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. This isn't 13 pieces of information. This is one piece of information. To an expert chess player, this is a pawn structure that fits a particular type of pattern, wherein we have kind of these locked up pawns on the A and B file. We have a castled king. We have, a push where H6 and G5 have been played. We see a very dominating kind of incursion of both F6 and D5 that have been played by white. But for an expert chess player, this is a single piece of information. And also the bishops being here, that's like part of the information. And then we see the rooks on the semi-open files or the open files. This is a very normal thing to kind of have in chess. We also see that white has sacrificed the exchange. It's a balanced position that is like coherent. And an expert chess player can just look at this and memorize it in just a couple seconds. But they can memorize it in a couple seconds because they can chunk the information down into, basically this is like kind of a few things going on. I couldn't memorize this chessboard looking at it for a few seconds, but if you gave me 30 seconds, I could probably memorize where every single piece is on this board. We're not going to do that experiment, but coming back to this study, because this is too long a tangent, what they found is if they put the chess pieces on completely random squares, the chess master doesn't do any better. And it's meaningful chunks that are important that you can do. And being able to chunk information is an important aspect of skill. Is it normal for the ViewCab account to be on top of the screen? Is it on top of the screen? Are we streaming with view count? I'm not sure. I see that we have a total of 15 viewers right now, which is way higher than I was expecting. 4 on YouTube and 13 on Twitch. I guess there's 17. Shout out to you guys. But let's continue. As we can see, a lot of the problems posed here relate to emotion. Emotion plays an important part of motivating us to act, as we will see in the next block, but also in determining the efficacy of our importance. We want to, of course, focus on the things over which we have control. Fortunately, emotions are under our control now, right? Anytime someone asks one of these questions, it implies the immediate opposite. But I remember there was a professor I had in college, and he would often call on you, ask you a question, and then you'd respond, and then he'd give the further kind of question, how certain are you of your response? And what I realized eventually was he only ever asked that question if the answer was wrong. And I realized this on the very last question he asked me, where I said I was like 60% sure or something like this. And then he asked, why'd you answer if your certainty was so low? And I was like, because no one else is answering the question. And he was like, fair enough. But I realized this, and then I was planning on the next time he called on me to be like 10%. Of course, he would be like, well, why are you answering it then? And just be like, well, every time you ask that question, the person's wrong. But I never got the chance. Missed opportunity. The Stoic position on emotion is that emotions are the result of a cognitive evaluation. There are, roughly speaking, two major theories on emotion. The cognitive theory, Stoics being in this camp, and the non-cognitive theory. I think we've already talked about Stoics in this book, which is why we're referencing them without explaining them. And the non-cognitive theory, also known as the James Lange theory. By the cognitivist understanding, we experience a situation, we judge it to be good or bad, and then we have an affective response to that situation. Evaluation precedes emotion. The cognitivist believes that by changing the way we evaluate what happens to us, we are able to control our emotions. The problem is that emotions don't function in the way that Stoics believe them to. The empirical data supports the non-cognitivist position. That is to say, our emotions precede our evaluation of them. We first have the affective response, and then we label it as an emotion. For example, the Stoics might explain the encounter of a bear in a forest thus: we see a bear, we evaluate it to be dangerous, then we get adrenaline, and then we run. The non-cognitivists would hold that the state of affairs is slightly different. We see a bear, we get adrenaline, then we, in a sense, realize we're afraid, and then we run. One of the major problems for unpacking which position is correct is the speed at which this processing occurs. From our subjective experience, both the fear and the assessment of danger seem to occur simultaneously. This is a subject that I studied quite a bit at university, or like I took a philosophy course on the philosophy of emotion, and this is we discussed the difference between these two positions. Another problem or consideration is what constitutes exactly thinking. In any case, it is important to emphasize that this post hoc attribution is not the same as causation. Remember, the post hoc evaluation is what it is that we're good at, but what we care, or what like the pundits and stuff are good at, but what we care about is predictive analysis. I think that there's a parallel I'm trying to draw here. We do want to reference Kahneman's prediction study. Question is can we cause our emotions? Are our emotions under our volatile control, or are they merely subject to influence? So this is the fundamental question we're asking ourselves, because again, we want to remain focused in particular on the areas in which we have control. The Stoics think you have control over emotions. The degree to which you control your emotions, if the Stoics are correct about emotion, is close to 100%. If they are incorrect, it's actually very, very low. Humans have a predisposition to be afraid of snake-like objects, although the fear itself isn't innate. We want to find a source. And now this is a little bit of a breakdown. But there is a sort of hardwiring. Obviously, I don't have the source here. Where humans aren't innately afraid of snake-like objects, but with just like one instance, they become rapidly afraid of snake-like objects. So they have like this hardwired, like super highway towards fear of snake-like objects without actually being afraid. Then we're going to talk about arousal, sympathetic versus parasympathetic level of arousal. How if you go too much parasympathetic, or no, is it too much sympathetic? Yeah, I think it's too much sympathetic, which is your heightened arousal performance is bad, but you need a little bit, otherwise you don't get this dialed-in focus. There's some debate as to whether the startle emotion is a reflex. And the startle response, very curiously, if you are firing a gun yourself, you, in theory, if you are performing a cognitive evaluation, you shouldn't be startled when you are the one pulling the trigger. But what they've noticed in studies is that the startle response still happens, to the sound of the gun and the kickback of this type of stuff when you're the one pulling the trigger, which suggests that it is a reflexive type of response. And there's a disagreement as to whether or not startling is considered an emotion. But it is reflexive, and it is not the result of cognitive type of evaluation. Otherwise, you wouldn't experience it when you know something's coming. Paul Ekman is kind of the leading theorist on emotion, specifically of facial response. But this is the gun study, I suppose, we just talked about. Cognitively, we expect a gunshot, so we shouldn't get startled. There's an interesting adrenaline shot study. This is a study I can remember where they shoot patients up with adrenaline and then they send them to a waiting room. And the idea is they are going to have the patients report on what emotion they are experiencing. But what they end up doing is there are a bunch of other actors in the waiting room with them. And some of the actors are told to exhibit excitement, and some in one group, and in another group, they are told to exhibit anger. And what they found is that when the person goes into the waiting room, the emotion that they are likely to report is the same emotion as the one that is being present around them. So if they are in the group where there's a bunch of angry people, they are likely to report that they are angry. And if they're in the group that is, the excited group, they're likely to report that they're very excited, like euphoric, like happy type of excited. And what this suggests is that they are experiencing the affect, the adrenaline, and then they are forming the evaluation as to what emotion they are experiencing. But to them, it's that they've always been angry. And what they are doing is a sort of post hoc analysis, but they think that they are, explaining it, and not only explaining it, but that they always knew that they were angry when they think of it, much in the same way how, like, news pundits always think that they had the correct kind of interpretation because there's this, people, like, reconstruct history in their heads and think that they had access to information before that they have access to now, and this is a type of, like, error that gets made. But the significant aspect of this as far as emotion goes is the person isn't making the evaluation of a situation that they are either angry or euphoric, angry or excited. They are feeling this very, very heightened sense of arousal, and then they are looking for what the explanation is, and then when they get if the emotion was preceding, if cognitive evaluation was preceding the emotion, then what the other people in the room were doing, if the Stoics are right, shouldn't affect what people report on self-report in terms of the study. But what they found is, there's plenty of influence by way of the actors on the subjects in terms of what emotion they reported. Both emotions aren't objective. In some sense, this resembles priming. Okay, I'm not sure what I'm getting at here. There's also this swinging bridge study. Are you live on Twitch and not on YouTube? We're on YouTube, but we are on My Ideas YouTube. We are not on the Gaming YouTube. So this is one of the reasons why the view count is also going to be lower. There's this interesting swinging bridge study. What they did is they had, I think, two types of bridges. One bridge that swung, one that didn't. I'm a little bit fuzzy on the details in regards to the specifics, but the idea is they were asked to rate the attractiveness level of people after having crossed a swinging bridge. So you cross the swinging bridge. What the swinging bridge does is it heightens your level of arousal. And when you're asked to rate how attractive people are, because your heart is already fluttering, you have this heightened sense of arousal. What they found is people were more likely to rate other people as being attractive after crossing a swinging rope bridge. There was a follow-up type of study where they did it after people were working out. So if you're working out, if you're in a gym, you're more likely to find people attractive. We could use this information, meet people at the gym or go hiking on a date. Because if you're on a date and you go hiking, they're going to have an elevated blood, heart rate. They actually will find you more attractive. Shout out to hiking. And so what this means is, like, we're not performing like an evaluation of how attractive someone is, just like in this weird abstracted objective sense, but our emotion is preceding our evaluation of this attractiveness, in the sense that if we have a heightened sense of arousal that is brought up by something that is entirely divorced from any sort of consideration of attractiveness, if you have this heightened sense of arousal, then that will make you think that you will incorrectly attribute that arousal to your perception or your belief or your evaluation of that attractiveness, and you will do this in a way that is, like, illusory to you, and you just think that they are attractive. And so this is another study that is meant to, obviously we didn't kind of explain it with the rhetorical flourishes because this is just several parenthetical asides, but it is meant to kind of further highlight how our emotions are preceding our evaluation. What is the area of work of generalist gaming? Well, that is on gaming. Aren't there theories that consciousness exists itself entirely of post hoc explanations of what the brain is doing? You would need to unpack that a lot more, but that is what some people think of what's going on, yeah. So some people think that we don't have free will, we just have a string of illusory post hoc explanations that make it appear as though we have free will, for example. I think Sam Harris would count as being in that camp. I think that there's a lot to unpack there in terms of epistemology and metaphysics when you start getting down to that kind of nitty-gritty type of detail of, like, what constitutes free will, what constitutes causation, this type of stuff, and that's, like, way too much to get into, like, if we want to, like... That's a lot to get into. I don't think we can cover all that. I mean, like, we could, but, like, I don't want to have, like, a 2-hour aside here. To be honest, people in the gym are probably objectively more attractive since they are in shape. Oh, that too. But, like, independent of that, you're going to form the perspective that it's like a whole nother layer. But yeah, in general, there's also some really ugly people at the gym too. But on average, they're probably more attractive. Shout out to the people who are in awful shape and still go to the gym. Those people are my favorite. They're fucking getting after it. I love those people. I'm, like, always happy when I see those people in the gym. Because I think that very often it's really easy to go to the gym and, like, get your motivation, like, sucked out by, like, you're just like, holy shit, I'm so far from where these people are. And, like, it's just like, that's rough, man. I mean, to be fair, I'm far from where a lot of those people are in terms of, like, body, but, like, in terms of strength, like, nowhere near. And I wonder what my motivation would be if I were actually just incredibly weak. It would probably be significantly worse. So, like, the people who seemingly have nothing going on for them at the gym and, like, keep getting after it, like, that's freaking, like, hard to do. It's much easier to go to the gym once you're, like, already a killer in terms of either, like, attractiveness or, like, strength or, like, this type of thing. I don't think it's as impressive as the people who, like, are just, like, you're like, bruh, you look like you don't go here. Yeah. The more attractive ugly group. Yeah. You'll still rate them as being more attractive, or this is what the studies, or I mean, this is what they did is they took a group of people and they had, like, some get their heart rate up and some not. But all right, this isn't to say that the Stoic position should be written off. I don't. In terms of practice, their viewpoint is correct. We ought to expand and dilate our frame to that which we have control of. So we stay focused on what we have control of, and then take responsibility for that as much as possible. It is just in the particulars of emotion that their specific approach is flawed. They believe we have more direct control over our emotions than we actually do, specifically that we cause them, which means that we have a bit of a problem. Emotions are important, but we don't have as much direct control as we'd like. They operate a little bit more like stuff entering our attention, which means we can do stuff proactively, but in real time, you have very little control over your emotion. Proactivity is more important for emotions. We need to plan. We need a plan for both responding as well as being proactive. So, we have a bit of a mental exercise, writing concerns. Now, this is the woman who wrote Choke, is the person who kind of did the study on this. But this is kind of an interesting one. That's why I watch Anatoly. Is that the guy who's like dresses up like a janitor and then he's like super jacked and he just smokes people? I think I'm just barely stronger than him, but he weighs like 140 or 150 pounds or something. I don't want that smoke. Last chapter, I think he could deadlift more than me, but I think I could squat. I think he deadlifts and benches more than me, but I can squat more than he can, and I'm probably can do a lot of other things more than he can. Last chapter, we talked a lot about responsibility for things within our control. The corollary to this is accepting the things that are outside of our control. Emotion is one of those things outside of our control, or at least our direct control. Our approach to them, as we will see, will be somewhat analogous to the approach we had in terms of intrusive thoughts related to OCD. We talk about meditation, talk about creating mental space and mindfulness. There's also supposed to be a mental exercise here, which we haven't written up yet, but the idea is that if you write out your concerns preceding engaging in a competition that is specifically very high stress, like golf, for example, these really high, if you write out your concerns about having a poor swing because of the yips and this type of stuff, there's evidence to suggest that this actually significantly decreases negative performance, or its negative effect on performance. By acknowledging that it's there, this is one that can help. I don't have the book readily available, but the book is Choke by Cian Belyuk or something like this, where she talks about this kind of extensively. And yeah, that helps out with that. Yeah, Anatoly. Anatoly is, yeah, maybe we can find a video. I saw one the other day that was freaking hilarious.
Today's actually a really exciting day.
No, not the ad. We don't. Shout out to not having ad blocker. Alright. Yeah, we have it on loop, so.
I'm sorry. Guys.
So this is the guy who pretends to be a janitor.
Do you hear this?
And he's like, I lift this now.
The sound and it's plastic here.
These fake weights.
Or air. I will try.
I will try.
Hold it, please.
Hold this, please. And this fucking mop's got weights in it.
But it's too small for this. You have very big.
I'm too small for this belt. This guy weighs like $140.
Weights on this belt.
Let's get to the point. Yeah.
No.
It's fake weights. No, no, no.
No.
But he's really, really good at deadlifting. So like he could smoke me in the deadlift, but the weighted mop fucking sends me. I saw a short of it this morning. He also did squats on one shoulder. I wonder how much we can bazooka squat on one shoulder. I don't really know. I've never tried it. Last chapter, we briefly took a look at reframing failure as feedback, but this alone is a bit of an incomplete solution. Regarding failure as feedback is going to be better in terms of maintaining an optimistic disposition and avoiding helplessness and depression. But action alone doesn't necessitate that that action is effective. Effective action requires that we make distinctions regarding what is a good outcome, what is a bad outcome, so that we can make better decisions about procedures moving forward. Failure isn't merely feedback, it's a particular kind of feedback. When we fail, we acquire both a data point and an undesirable result. There's a Thomas Edison quote, but maybe, or was that I've not failed, I've found 1,000 ways that don't work, but we kind of don't like Thomas Edison. Maybe we won't include that quote. We want to maximize learning and minimize cognitive distortions that are pessimistic and don't reflect reality. The bar bends under that weight? Yeah, it bends under, like, starts bending at about 350. Makes the lift easier on one shoulder? I don't know about that. In a sort of sense, there's a bait and switch, a renunciation of responsibility of the cause, but a reaffirmation of responsibility towards moving forward. That failure doesn't necessarily reflect on me, but it is going to be feedback. You have to acknowledge the failure, and in some sense, you accept the failure in the same way that you would, in writing concerns out. You accept the reality of the situation, which is your emotions are not necessarily what you want them to be for the purposes of performance, because you don't have direct control over them in an absolute sense. And by not resisting them so much, you actually take away a lot of their power. Let's continue. Seligman on suspending optimism. I don't actually remember what Seligman says about this. He had something about not being overly optimistic? I'm not sure. Oh, the bar bending? You get more acceleration when lifting from the bottom? Yeah, it's useful for... The bar bend is useful for deadlifts. It's bad for squats, though. Or it's not even acceleration. It's that you don't have to... Mechanically speaking, off the floor is where most people are most disadvantaged. You don't have to pull the full weight off the floor. If the bar bends like an inch, then it is only when it is an inch off the ground that you are lifting the full weight. So, like, when you have half of the bar, like, lifted, you're pulling significantly less. That's, like, really, like, kind of a small detail. But stiff bars are a lot harder to dead with, but they are a lot easier to squat with. Because the whip on the bar is, like, pretty substantive. I think we have a video on Instagram where we, like, load up the bar with a lot of bumper plates, which cause a lot more whip, where we, like, almost miss, like a 600-pound squat, which wouldn't otherwise be very difficult. Or, well, I mean, it's difficult, but, like, not, like, we wouldn't have a super high chance of missing. Maybe it was, like, 550 squat, actually. And a big part of that is the whip is a little bit rough. But this raises a weird sort of question. How should we be concerned with performance? Is there a way to reconcile this? Not sure. It's been a while. Okay. So, how should we measure success? Hey, Keith, how's it going? A lot of goals aren't particularly good. Not because they aren't worthwhile, but because they don't provide adequate direction towards their realization. I want to be more confident is a common goal, but what does that mean exactly? More confident isn't particularly clear, and we want clarity when our learning environment is wicked. We definitely want to rework that sentence, which is why it's parenthetical. Make $1 million is something on a lot of people's lists, and it does have the advantage in the way of being in the way that confidence isn't, because it's measurable and quantifiable. But it's hard to point specifically to some aspect of a goal and say, that is the side of my control. It's hard to point to make $1 million and be like, that's where I have control. It isn't clear what the path is or what the steps are. Not to mention that the timetable for the goal might be might be rather long. We want to have goals that help us to decide what we should be doing right now. Goals that are relevant to our values. Let's think back to models of change for a moment. If we want to be effective. I don't know what this is referring to. I forget which models have changed. I know a lot of models have changed. I forget which ones we've invoked in the previous chapter of the book. So, making $1 million gets easier over time. Indeed, it does. Well, making $1 million and having $1 million, I guess, are two different goals, huh? Fortunately, management guru. Peter Drucker is one of the OGs, came up with a tidy acronym for making effective goals. We want goals that are SMART. Specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. Whether or not the money or the confidence is relevant is contingent upon our values. More confident fails to be specific or measurable, and make $1 million fails to be actionable or timely. What we need to do is to take our original goals and then filter them through a process that will keep the essence of the goal the same, but make them SMART. For confidence, that might be trying to figure out how we can become more confident and to turn that into something quantifiable. That may be something like keeping a confidence log. We have a log for exercises and committing to spending 10 minutes a night writing in it. I think that was, in terms of reframing, the notion of having a specific log for a specific value that you had would help to increase your focus on it, increase your attention to it, and prime you to expecting to see that type of thing and also realizing when you see that thing. So having one of those things specifically for confidence could be an exercise you could do, and spending 10 minutes a night writing in it that is specific. It is measurable, it is actionable, it is relevant, and it is timely. You have all of those features there. Now, that may or may not be effective. Yeah, there's the rub. It's specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. But if we gave ourselves the goal of writing 10 minutes in the night, we will clearly know whether or not we did the task ourselves, even if we don't know how effective the task will be for reaching the overarching goal of confidence. If we are ambiguous, the problem is that we can kick ourselves in the shin, and we won't really know if we are successfully, implementing something, or not. Like, one of the problems with like hustle porn in general as a genre, or hustle porn, or rip YouTube stuff. But one of the problems is like, it just tells you to try harder. And try harder is not specific at all. And the problem is that when you come back to this post hoc analysis, which is a type of thing that we're kind of coming back to in this discussion, when you come back to the post hoc analysis, the problem is that you can beat yourself up and be like, oh, I just needed to try harder. If what you need to do and what you set forth for yourself is specific and measurable, then you can always come back and say, we just need a different approach. But you can't, like, it makes it so you are denying yourself this opportunity to be negative to yourself and beat yourself up if you're specific and measurable, because you will just know that you chose the wrong option in terms of what your goal was, and you just need to change it. You need a different goal. Or if you accomplished it and you did the 10 minutes log for every night for 30 days or whatever it is, and you're not getting more confident, then you know the intervention's not effective. But if it's just try harder to be more confident, you will just like beat yourself up and be like, oh, I just didn't try hard enough. And trying hard is just not a very good sort of, how should I say? Try harder is not a very good intervention, just categorically speaking. Just try harder, because it's not, SMART. It's not specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. I mean, it's actionable, relevant, and timely. You can always just try harder, but it's not specific or measurable. If it's effective, then we can continue that approach, like the confidence log, and if it's not, we can look for another one. For the money example, we need to break the task into smaller chunks involving both developing revenue streams as well as savings and investment strategies. How do we get these goals and break them down into smaller chunks? And this is another exercise. This is a brainstorming exercise, backwards planning. And the idea is that you take one goal and you just go backwards from that. Well, to make $1 million, what do you need to do? Or to have $1 million, it's like, well, you need to make money over a specific amount. And then also invest money. And then you break this down and reverse engineer in a flowchart type of way, moving backwards and backwards and backwards until you get to something that is actionable and relevant. Is the idea. Beginning to transition to process orientation. We want to be process oriented. Having $1 million is not a process, but if we can break that down into, smaller and smaller chunks, like we need to have a large income. Okay, what do we need to do to have a large income? Well, we need to have a job. What do we need to do to have a job? Well, we need to get an interview. Well, what do we need to get an interview? We need to put ourselves out there. Well, what do we need to do to put ourselves out there? We need to have a resume, or what's going to be effective for putting ourselves out there. We need to have a resume. And now suddenly, a resume is something you could work on, right? And then you might encounter like other steps in that analysis. We need a high-paying job. What do we need for a high-paying job? We need qualifications. How do we get qualifications? We need a good education. How do we get a good education? We need to be at a good school. How do we get at a good school? We need to apply to a good school and get in. Well, how do we apply to a good school and get in? We need to study for the SATs or whatever it is. Or we need a good SAT score. How do we get a good SAT score? We need to study for the SATs. And eventually, you can reach your way back to a point in analysis that is specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely, and that is the purpose of this exercise, is, you just, here. You have this cool milli goal, but you're going to break it down into bigger and bigger or smaller and smaller chunks until eventually it gets relevant, until eventually it's, work on the resume, right? And there's going to be a lot of steps in between here and work on resume, but eventually, and it doesn't even have to be work on resume. Maybe you don't think resume is the effective strategy, and this is a different sort of thing. But the point is that we're working back to something that's within our control, that is specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. This seems unnecessary, but okay. Asking questions is a good form of brainstorming, but we can do a little bit better than that in terms of specificity of our practice in this regard. Questions are effective to be sure, because that's the brainstorming exercise we had before. But if we know what the target is, the goal that we are trying to turn into a SMART goal, then we ought to make the practice one through which we ask questions that are a little bit more pointed. The backwards planning flowchart was a technique invented by Barbara Scher. Invented isn't the right word. Developed is actually better. I don't know why we said invented. And it works by taking the goal and then running through an iterative process of asking the following questions. Could I achieve that goal right now? If not, what would I need first? Until one can come up with an action they can take right now, and then they just get started. The technique cuts through to actionable tasks, but we can also add a few more questions to ask ourselves to align with our specific intent to have SMART goals. How can I make this task required of me more specific? How can I make completion of the task more measurable? Could I achieve that goal right now? If not, what would I need first? To be asked of the first major goal being broken down, how is this task relevant to my values? Of the smaller chunks, how important it is to this subtask to the actualization of my main task? And then we, of course, want to take a look at some examples, which we kind of did. We can cite an example from her book, and then she does talk about how it was received and that a lot of people kind of pushed back because it kind of forces you to either take action or recognize that you're not taking action. In that sense, it makes your goals more real. Are you familiar with the term yak shaving? It's from programming. It's a form of procrastinating where every task you think of, something else that needs to be done first until you find yourself down the street shaving a yak for some reason. I've not heard that term, but that tracks. This, in theory, is supposed to cut through that type of thinking and make it remarkably clear what it is you need to be doing. And so if you feel like you can't really do anything, doing something like this might be useful. And maybe you do need to shave a yak sometimes. Sometimes you need to shave a yak. Let's take a look at one of the goals we looked at earlier. Achieving confidence. Be confident isn't much of a directive. First, we need an idea of what confidence is. So let's say we take Nathaniel Brandon's model of self-esteem, that the two components of self are that is the two components of self-efficacy and self-worth. For our example, we'll focus on self-worth, the belief that one is worthy of happiness. If we talk to ourselves negatively and have an explanatory style that is something we could and have an explanatory style that is and have an explanatory that is negative, then that is something we can work on. What do we need to do first? We can do the ABCDE exercise. Better than that, we can schedule a time to do them, and the time is spent is specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. Moving back a step, we also want to prime ourselves for viewing ourselves as worthy. We can ask questions regarding what we consider would make us worthy in order to paint us in a better picture of ourselves, and then set up implementation intentions to prime ourselves to be aware of what would make us worthy. We could also keep a self-worth log, similar to the confidence log, right? We set times to do these tasks, prime ourselves for doing them, and then follow through. All of this is smart. We cultivate the branches that are effective and prunes the ones that are not. So all of this may be smart. It's not necessarily effective, but when we see it not being effective or we think it to not be effective, we can change our approach. We shape our practice. Now, let's dilate our focus and look back at the goal, achieving confidence. Is confidence an important aspect of many other goals, a branch that fulfills their requirement? It isn't a stretch of the imagination. Like, for example, getting a girlfriend is something I occasionally see people asking me for advice on. I don't know if I think if I'm the person you're going to advise on that, you've probably made some sort of mistake along the way, but this would, for example, be a branch of the goal of getting a girlfriend. Being more confident might be one of the branches, right? And then from more confident, we continue to branch and branch and branch until we reach something that is, going to be smart. So if we kind of erase this here, you might say, well, I want to have a girlfriend or whatever. Luckily for us, this only requires two things. And then we say, well, what do we need to do that? We need to be more confident, to be more attractive. Maybe we need to get in shape. Maybe we need to go outside. Actually putting yourselves... so being confident and attractive, maybe attractive is actually the branch before this. We need to be attractive. The truth hurts. And then we go down that branch and we get to confidence, right? So this can be just one branch in one way of doing things. Also, almost everything confidence is helpful for, but often the way to be confident is actually just to be competent. But we move back the branch we need to be attractive, and then from attractiveness we get confidence, right? And then we get this practice that we are putting in, or we keep going on and on and on until we get to a practice that is smart. But also, just to be clear, don't get lost in the sauce here. You actually also have to have opportunities. In some sense, girlfriends is opportunities meets attractiveness. Go outside is the missing ingredient for me. I never meet new people. Yeah, so if you don't have any opportunities, it really doesn't matter how attractive you are. But you can branch back from even this goal, right? And form this reverse engineered type of flowchart. Perhaps the branching framing of this flowchart tree isn't even it isn't a stretch of the imagination to think that backwards planning will make for $1 million, will involve abstract mental states or qualities such as confidence. Yeah, maybe one of the things for getting $1 million is confidence. Exactly. Perhaps the branching framing of this flowchart as a tree isn't even the appropriate way to look at how fundamental mental states are to action. If we apply the tree analogy to how we are looking at agency as a whole, it should be reframed. The branches of a tree which are most visually spectacular, bearing fruit, foliage, and flowers, The branches of the tree are that which is most visually spectacular, bearing fruit, foliage, and flowers. The branches are the external actions of agency, but branches are not the only part of the tree that extends from the trunk in diverging pathways. Nor are branches the first part of the tree. The roots are. And so now we're going to make the argument that mental states are kind of the roots of agency. When we backwards plan from branches, we hold up stories and artifacts that resonate with our values and inspire us. So we're starting from this, get $1 million, get a girlfriend, get whatever it is. We trace the lifeline back from the branches to the trunk and into the roots. That is, having effective mental states. A tree dies without a roots, or branches die without a roots, or are victims in the wind. This isn't to say that the leaves are unimportant. Seasonal considerations aside, a tree without its leaves will be unable to conduct photosynthesis and will die. And we want to relate this back to feeling a need for meaning and having, goals and aspirations and stuff like this. In chapter 1, we discussed a call for an ethics of attention that was formulated around practice, a practice which we built around the notion of mental exercise and mental fitness. If we center our practice around the control of our attention, we make ourselves more resilient to helplessness by both framing our responsibility around something we control, our attention, as well as attending to our explanatory style. Looks like we have an unfinished sentence. But we want to structure action around something more concrete. Man, the roughness is starting to come through. This chapter, and more specifically this exercise, marks an inflection point in our story of agency. Here we are standing at the center of our bridge from attention to agency. Behind us is the starting point of free will, what we can control, attention, and the means by which we can control our attention. In front of us is goals, which are informed by values and the proper methodology for achieving them. We need to build this bridge from where we stand, meeting in the middle where mental states are transmuted into action. Let's reiterate some of the problems here that are facing us. First, we have to turn our goals into processes that we can undertake. To identify which processes are best, we need to construct models for what constitutes success, as well as how to achieve that success. For many tasks, we will need change and acquire skill. We want to have an effective approach that is in that regard, and we are inhibited by the wickedness of feedback in our environment. Finally, we need to update our views on emotion and synthesize those with our views, those views into our practice. We're going to be looking more into cognitive biases. Yeah, we are, especially more and more, because we hadn't kind of done that. But we have kind of a chapter summary that we are going to flesh out at some point. But we talked about arousal, how you can be too aroused, not aroused enough. We also have tilt, where you can start misinterpreting the situation. And then kind of as an extension of arousal, we do have choking. This is part of arousal. This is just arousal in general, and then this is choking. And then we also have how it is very easy. Our emotions can often lead us astray in terms of learning to do things incorrectly. We talked a little bit about reframing failure and talking about what success is. We talked about having SMART goals. And a significant portion of our bridge from attention to agency will involve taking our goals, informed by our values, and working backwards from them to things within our volitional control. The backwards planning flowchart is a powerful tool for this. And that is kind of the chapter. I think that we'll probably come back next week and go through chapter 8, which is the rejoinder to this chapter to form out a full block. But I hope you guys kind of enjoyed this a little bit. Also, if you want to get YouTube updates, and you're on the Twitch currently, because I think almost all our viewers are on Twitch, if you wanted to get YouTube updates specifically on this, you can subscribe to my other YouTube, the Generalist Ideas, and there will be, it'll appear on YouTube and this type of thing. Yeah, I think we're going to wrap up. I don't think we're going to raid anyone. Maybe we see if anyone's streaming Victoria 3. Although, honestly, actually, rather than continuing to watch stuff, I would encourage you to just take a crack at this backwards planning flowchart idea. You know, take one goal you want, whatever it is, and then tell yourselves what are all the things that we need in order to get this done, and then backwards plan from there until you get to something that is specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely. And we won't rate anyone, you know, and instead give a little bit of a exit on the topic of there's stuff we can do. All right. I hope you guys enjoy.